Okay, here we go. Get a little better lighting here. Okay, whatever. All right. Good evening. So if you have the source sheet, then you can take a look at it. If you don't have it, you can pull it from the chat. If you don't know how to do that, that's okay. You can get by without it. I want to start with the story from the Talmud. And the story is told, it's the first source on the page, of a Babylonian who moved to Israel, and he married a woman there. Now in Israel, during Talmudic times, many spoke Babylonian. So they both spoke Babylonian. The only problem was they spoke different dialects. I'm going to mute you again, just because it's a little background noise there. They spoke different dialects. That was the only problem. And so he said to her, cook me, in the Aramaic, trei talfi. Cook me 2 talfi. What is talfi? So at Rashi, the commentator actually says 2 possibilities. It could mean 2 pieces of meat. It could mean 2 lentils. And what he meant was, 2, if he meant lentils, he meant 2 portions of lentils. But in her dialect, that really meant 2 lentils. So she went and she cooked him 2 lentils. So she brought him 2 lentils, right? 2 tiny beans. So he got a little bit angry. And the next day, instead of telling her to cook 2 lentils, he said, cook a sa of gariba for me, which is also lentils. And he intended, a sa is actually an enormous amount. He didn't mean so much. That's the way you say it. He meant cook a lot this time. But she cooked an actual sa for him, which is a measurement, which is very large, much more than a person could eat. So the next time he said, go and bring me 2 buzzini. Buzzini, he meant gourds, like pumpkins or something. I guess zucchini or something like that. And that's what the word buzzini means it meant in his Aramaic dialect. She went and brought him 2 lamps instead, because in her dialect, buzzini meant lamps. So she's getting everything wrong. So finally, he's so angry at her, he says, go and break them on the head of the bava. Now, a bava is a gate in Aramaic. In the Talmud, we have bava kama, bava metzia, bava basra. The first gate, the second gate, the third, the last gate, those deal with civil law. A bava is a gate. But she didn't recognize that word. She didn't understand the word. So she went out and she saw someone who she knew named Bava ben Buta sitting there. And her husband had said, go smash these on the head of on the bava, on the gate. But she didn't know what that meant. So she thought he meant smash them on the head of Bava ben Buta. Now, Bava ben Buta happened to be the greatest rabbi of the time as well. So she goes out and she takes the candlesticks and she smashes them on the head of Bava ben Buta. And Bava ben Buta, you'd think he'd be so upset, somebody just walked over out of nowhere and smashed candlesticks on his head. But instead he said to her, why did you do that, right? What was that for? So she said, that's what my husband told me to do. So he said, you fulfilled your husband's desire. May the omnipresent bring forth from you 2 sons like Bava ben Buta. You should have 2 sons that grow up to be great leaders of the Jewish people. So there's many, many lessons that you can take from this story. First of all, that if a husband and wife don't speak the same dialect, they should try to, at least carry a dictionary or something so they know what each other are saying. But specifically at this moment, I want to just bring out is Bava ben Buta's reaction. Somebody does something that's totally offensive. Somebody walks over, smashes something on his head, and instead of exploding at her, he asks, what was that for? And his reaction really is kind. and he blesses her instead. Now that is something that seems, quite a person would have to be on quite a high level. And you might think that such people no longer exist in this world. Somebody who could react with such calm and really kindness and bless her instead. But the truth is that there are people like that. And one of those people was a rabbi who lived. He passed away, I think, maybe in the late 80s, early 90s. His name was Rabbi Shlomo Freifeld. And his biography, I recommend it. It's called Reb Shlomo. And if you want you don't need to learn Musar. You could just read his biography. You want to learn about a great person and what we're capable of becoming, then read about Rabbi Shlomo Freifeld. So one of the stories there is that he was once in a bank, and Rabbi Freifeld was a very large man, both in physical size and in his spiritual size. He was a giant. He was very tall, and he once entered a bank, and as he approached the teller blurted out, "Ma, you're the tallest rabbi that I've ever seen." So, right. Then she told him, and by the way, there's a notation on your account. It's asking you the manager is requesting that you meet with him. So once he finished his business with the teller, he went upstairs to the manager's office, and the manager says to him, I was reviewing your account, Rabbi Freifeld, and it seems that you're a little bit short. So the rabbi turns to his companion and he says, "Do you hear this? Downstairs, they think I'm so tall, but upstairs, they know that I'm short." Right? So this was his way of expressing his humility, right? In this world, people might think that I'm this great rabbi, but upstairs, they know what I'm, really that I'm not that great. And this was his humility. So one time, when he was a young rabbi, actually, before he later opened his own yeshiva in Far Rockaway, New York. But before that, he was a rabbi of a congregation, and he was invited to attend a wedding of a congregant or a relative of a congregant, and the parents of the bride, who he knew, were divorced. So often a divorced couple, when their child gets married, they'll work it out and they'll be able to walk the child down the aisle together. But in this case, that wasn't happening. These parents were not going to walk the child down the aisle together, and it was up to the officiating rabbi to make the final decision who would walk down the bride, and somebody was going to be hurt by that decision. Actually, how did they say the story actually is that somebody was her and they felt that it was the fault of the officiating rabbi. I'm not sure how much he weighed in on the decision or not, but they felt that it was the officiating rabbi's fault. Now, Rabbi Freifeld was not the officiating rabbi, but he was the most rabbinic-looking person present at the wedding. So when this relative, who was very upset, arrived, she stormed over to this rabbi, who was obviously at fault for this decision, and she actually spat in his face and shouted at him for his insensitivity and how could he do such a thing to her, etc. So now again, he wasn't actually at fault, or he wasn't the officiating rabbi, but he didn't react. And one of his students who was present came over and he said, "Okay, here's your coat. Like, maybe, I assume you want to go home now." And he said, "No." He said, he looked up in surprise. He said, "We should go home already? The chuppah, the ceremony, has barely ended." And the student recounts that he danced that night as I have rarely seen him dance, exerting himself well beyond the call of duty. So he completely shook this off. He didn't respond, he didn't yell at her, he didn't tell her off, he didn't explain. He just let it go and moved on. And the ability to do this, the ability to receive an insult or when someone tries to embarrass us or does embarrass us, and to shrug it off takes great humility to do that. Because of course we've been hurt, our egos have been hurt, and we want to just lash out or respond in some way. But it's often not very productive to do so, and we're often, as we'll see, better off just not reacting. And in fact, when the Mesilas Yesharim, when Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto in the Path of the Upright discusses what's involved in humility, he says 4 categories. He says there's 4 parts, really more. These are 4 parts that have to do with action, that he says are involved with humility. And number 1 is the way that we carry ourselves. We haven't discussed this so much. We may discuss it in another week. To carry ourselves in a humble manner. You can see like someone who like struts and like dresses really cool and fancy. Like that's not carrying oneself. We should dress proper and nice, but there's a way that we should walk and a way that we should dress that's not showing off. That a humble person doesn't do that. That's number 1 that he says. And number 2 is this. Number 2, he says, is tolerating insult. We'll come back to that in a moment. Number 3 and 4 we've talked about already. Number 3, he says, would be to run from honor. And number 4 would be to honor others. But we talked a lot about honoring others last week. I just want to add one more thing, which also I've been rereading this biography of Rabbi Freifeld because it's just such a great book. So one of the things that he did, that they talk about, was he built people up. He had an amazing way of inspiring people to reach their potential. And sometimes by giving them a little honor, we're actually doing a great service to the other person. Again, as we talked about, we don't want to be seeking honor, but we should be giving honor to others. And sometimes, especially a person who lacks confidence, to inspire confidence within them, to give them a little compliment or give them a little attention and recognition can do a world for that type of person. One time, Rabbi Freifeld was visiting a woman in the hospital. She was an older woman, and she was weak. And when he left, they saw that she had so much more strength. And they said, "What did you say to her?" And he said, "I just told her who she is." Because he had the ability to see the greatness in another person and to compliment them on that and to honor them for it and recognize that. And that goes into honoring others is really building people up and inspiring them to be the greatest that they can be. So I know we're sort of walking a fine balance of like, where do you draw the line? And we don't want to be flattering people too much, especially if we're just doing it. Certainly if we're doing it for our own benefit, that we shouldn't be doing. But if we're doing it to build them up, so that's something that's a good idea. That goes back to honoring others. But we're talking now about the second thing on the Mesilas Yesharim's list, which is tolerating insult. So we saw the story in the Talmud of Baba ben Buta tolerating insult. He tolerated having candles smashed on his head, that embarrassment. And we talked about Rabbi Freifeld, someone spat in his face. So the idea, and the Mesilas Yesharim quotes this, it stems from the Talmud. The Talmud says a couple of things. One of the things it says is when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, when it comes to our Day of Judgment, so there's a special strategy that we can use to earn a good judgment in God's eyes. There's more than one, but one of them is that the Talmud says that whose sin does God bear? Someone who overlooks other people's sins. And so if we're able to overlook a wrong that was done to us, an insult, someone hurting our feelings, then if we can get past it, then God will overlook some of our misdeeds and our mistakes and our sins. And then it goes on and it says in the Talmud in a number of places, and this is on the sources. I have it as number 2. The sages taught, those who are insulted but do not insult others, who hear their shame but do not respond, who act out of love and are joyful in their suffering. In these moments, they remain joyful. About them, the verse states in Judges and Shoftim, and they that love him are as the sun going forth in its might. So the Talmud praises a person who has 3 steps here, and we'll have to break them down what they are. Those who are insulted but do not insult others, hear their shame but do not respond, act out of love and are joyful in their suffering. Then about them the verse states, and they that love him are as the sun going forth in its might. We'll have to really break this down because it's kind of confusing. What are all these things? What are we talking about? What does it do with the sun? What does that have to do with might? What's going on here? What are each of these categories? So let's take it step by step. So some of the commentaries explain that when a person insults us, different people may have different reactions. But one reaction would be to hit them right back, right? They call me a bad name, I'm going to call them a bad name, right? That's how many people react in that situation. They cursed me out, I'm going to curse them back. All the time people do this. So that's the first line. Those who are insulted but do not insult back. Okay. Then we have some people, they're not going to insult back, but they're going to start debating what was said about them. You're saying I'm lazy? I'm not lazy. I did this and this and this, right? You're calling me stupid. I'm not stupid, right? So you don't call them a name back, but you argue back and you defend yourself. And so that's the second step. They hear their shame but do not respond. And the third step, perhaps the loftiest, is that they not only, or I guess the third way that people respond, which is still not necessarily correct, is they're silent, but they still are upset by it. Now, we said last week, it's normal to get upset. A person should get upset if they're, and a person should be able to feel embarrassment. But there is a level that a person could reach, which is even though I know I've been embarrassed, but I still see it, I say, everything that occurs to me is for the good, and there's good that can come from this. So either I say, God wouldn't have allowed this to happen to me unless he wanted me to learn from it or to improve from it. Or, as we'll see, we have the chance even to walk away with better off than when we started with that person who insulted us. So there's different ways in which it may be that we can rejoice over it. We could be happy that this happened to us because we can come out of the situation better off. But these are the natural responses, is either to insult them back, to dispute the insult, to respond at least, or to be silent but still upset about it. But the loftiest level the Talmud recommends and about whom the verse says that they're like the sun coming out in its might, that's a person who rejoices and appreciates what happened to them. Now, insults aren't always people calling us stupid, right? Often we perceive any criticism as an insult. A spouse, criticizes the other spouse for doing something wrong. There's what they say and what the other spouse hears. The wife says, could you pick that up? Or why didn't you pick that up? And the husband hears, you're lazy, right? The husband says, why did you buy this? And the wife hears, well, you're stupid. You don't know how to spend money. You don't know how to watch your wallet, right? So there's what the person says and what they hear. Now that's natural that when we hear criticism, we take it as an insult. We perceive it as a personal attack. Why is that? Because if we're being criticized, then it must be that we have some fault. And our ego doesn't like that, right? Our ego wants to tell us that we're perfect, each of us. And people live with this illusion that they're faultless. And sometimes we have to face the fact that we have deficiencies, but we have trouble doing that. And we may just excuse ourselves. We'll say we don't want to be better, or we just haven't had the same opportunities, and that's why we haven't, developed ourselves, or that's why I do this or that. And if someone criticizes us, so they are saying that it's our fault, and we're not faultless. And we don't like that, and we take it as an insult often. How do people respond to criticism? So really back to what we said in the Talmud. So either they or we could go in the order that it said. It said they insult back, right? They counterattack, or they justify, they respond, they explain, they justify why what they did was okay. So justification means I am right and you are wrong for criticizing me. Counterattack means I'm wrong, but you're also wrong. So, why are you telling me that I'm wrong? So here's an example, right? A wife asked her husband to buy some tomatoes on the way home from work. And like me, right, he forgets. So when he arrives home, she criticizes him for his forgetfulness. Now, she may even say, if this isn't the first time, you are always forgetting to do things I ask you to do. Always, right? It's the second time, but it's always. So that's always a bad word to use. And in response, he's going to get angry because you're telling me that I have a fault, right? That his ego doesn't like that. So what's his response? So if he chooses justification, so he'll say, oh, I wasn't feeling well. I was too busy. I have too many things on my mind. I was in a rush. And as Rabbi Feldman writes in his marriage book, when he talks about this, one cannot help but marvel at the human being's ability to think so quickly when under attack. Right? We have all the excuses that we can come up with. Or we counterattack. We say, it's true, I forgot, but last week you forgot something even more important. You forget also. Or you're asking me to do things that you could do yourself. Why don't you just do it yourself? Don't you know I'm so busy? Or even if I bought the tomatoes, you would just leave them rotting in the fridge. It happens all the time. So there's all kinds of counterattacks that a person might choose. And whether it's the justification route or the counterattack route, neither of these are going to be good strategies in the face of criticism. Right? It doesn't have to be an example between husband and wife. It could be between coworkers, right? You're not doing your job. You're not living up to expectations. And again, or certainly from a boss to a employee. Could happen between friends. You're not taking your turn to do whatever, right? All these can happen in many different scenarios. But whenever we get criticized, we go on the defense. And there's really only one correct response. Yes, Sue?
What about the humor response? Lightening the conversation. If because then you're showing them that maybe they don't have to think, and you're doing it in a gentle way, that it's really that much of a life or death thing for you to win an argument. You just want to know really where they're coming from and why they have that opinion.
Right.
So you make a little
fair.
joke about
That's fair to ask about what they said. That's fair. What do you mean? Right. If it's not in a defensive way, if it's what do you mean, right? Then that's arguing already. But if it's can you explain where did I go wrong? Right. Yeah, that's productive. But and that's really what I was about to say is that the proper response to criticism is to an honest appraisal of what was said, and often it's accurate or mostly accurate or somewhat accurate, and even if the person didn't say it in the right way, we still should say, that doesn't mean that it's not valid. It could, sometimes people do criticize us in an insulting way. and they don't say it in a nice way. That doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean we should argue back. It doesn't mean we should fight back, right? Counterattack or justify. It doesn't change anything. We should still appraise it whether what they said is true. And this is actually referenced in the Talmud, this idea. If you look at number 3, it's referenced in a very interesting way. The Talmud says, Rava said to Rabba Bar Mari, from where is the matter derived where the sages say, if your friend calls you a donkey, prepare a saddle on your back. If your friend calls you a donkey, get yourself a saddle. So we explain the source is in a conversation. You see it in the Torah between a conversation between Hagar, the concubine of Abraham, and the angel. Hagar is sent away from her home. Her mistress Sarah. Sarai is not happy with her. She sends her away. And the angel, she meets an angel, and the angel says, Hagar, maidservant of Sarai, from where did you come and to where are you going? Now she's no longer the maidservant of Sarai, yet he calls her that. So she says, I am fleeing from the face of my mistress, Sarai, and she calls her a mistress. So she accepts that appointment, that reference, that, oh, you call me you call me your maidservant, then she's my mistress, and she just went with that. That's a hint to this idea of sort of accepting there wasn't criticism necessarily, but sort of accepting the facts. There must be something about the way she's comporting herself that implies that this is true. And if a person calls us a donkey, then there must be something that about me that's true. That there must be a reason why he's calling me a donkey. So I should get myself a saddle. And again, the idea is that there's probably going to be at least some truth in any criticism. And even going back to those first stories, I mean, not really in those ones where it was like random attacks, but in what the Talmud discusses, where it says, if somebody insults you, don't insult back, and someone shames you, don't respond. But even if it's just someone insulting us, often 99% of what they're saying is not true, but maybe there might be 1% that's true, and 1% that we can actually walk away with as to improve ourselves. Let's just use it to improve ourselves rather than creating an argument. So just looking at Bill, your question, how do these principles relate just in argument in general? Yeah, so argument and turning things into a debate is a good question. It's a whole topic in itself, and I'm hoping to do it. To just what happens in an argument and why it's so important to avoid. So we'll leave that for now. But now we're talking just about accepting criticism, accepting an insult, and really King Solomon in Proverbs writes this at source number 4. Do not rebuke a scoffer, for he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Right? So we see already that a wise person, when he hears reproof, when he hears rebuke or criticism, so he will love you for it. Because at the end of the day, if somebody criticizes us, if somebody insults us, then there may be something that we can gain from that and to improve ourselves. Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky, he writes that he read that a lobster, basically a lobster has a shell, it finds a shell, it grows a shell, and then when it starts to get uncomfortable, it finds a rock to hide behind to protect itself. It sheds that shell, and then it grows a new shell. And he said, you learn from here that in order to a catalyst for growth is to feel uncomfortable. The lobster starts to feel uncomfortable, then it sheds its shell, and then it can grow a little bit more and grow a new shell. So sometimes criticism makes us feel uncomfortable. It's true, but sometimes we have to feel uncomfortable a little bit in order to grow. So Proverbs, in Mishlei, King Solomon says, reprove a wise man and he will love you. The commentators actually have a really great reading of this, though. Some commentators learn that it says, do not rebuke a scoffer, meaning when you rebuke someone, when you criticize someone, don't call them a scoffer, don't call them a late, don't call them lazy or stupid or names. Rather, reprove them as a wise person. Treat the person like a wise person. Tell them, I know that, start with a compliment. I know you're very wise. I know that you know how to make good decisions. I don't think that that was the best decision. If you start off with, that was really stupid, why did you do that? And you call the person a name and you call them stupid, they're not going to listen to you. But if you call them smart and you say, I think you generally have really good judgment, why did you do that? Then that is something that will be more accepted. So they read this verse in Proverbs in number 4. Some commentaries, do not rebuke a scoffer, meaning don't rebuke them as a scoffer or as stupid, or don't call them a name when you rebuke them. Rather, reprove them as a wise person, and then they will love you for it. They'll accept that criticism, and they'll grow from it. So when people insult us, when people criticize us, we're best off just listening, accepting it, and appraising it, and moving on. This I should just mention that I'm talking about specifically, where this isn't an ongoing thing, right? If it's abusive and it's ongoing, then it's a different story. You don't let that go. Now, what you do is a different question, and I don't necessarily have the answer to that. That's a more complicated question. But if I'm talking about someone gets angry and they say the wrong thing, or they insult us out of anger, and it's more of a one-off, or it's not an ongoing thing. If it's an ongoing thing, then we have to deal with it differently. But a one-time thing, we're best off just ignoring it. Okay, interesting, Sue. If someone is attempting to criticize us, the content isn't always something that is shameful to have as a trait. The fact that they are using it as an insult can be very telling of how they feel about themselves. That is a good point. What do you mean exactly by how they feel about themselves?
Well, they could be suggesting that you're weak-minded or you're brainwashed, and they could be saying that, well, in their case, when they had certain opinions, it was because of it, or they didn't know enough to say anything to whoever was getting to them. So it could just mean that they couldn't possibly believe that someone could be proud of having certain opinions or being a certain way.
They could just disagree with you and therefore call you wrong or stupid, or that's is that what you're saying?
Not exactly. Let's say someone's always sending you things online that have to do with their opinion that seem very, very pointed at bringing down what you think or what their interpretation is about what you think means. So there's not much you can do. It's totally ineffective to just directly argue back. You can ask questions. You can ask them to elaborate on why they don't give an answer, and they move on to the next subject doing the same thing. It's just basically saying they're really the one who's brainwashed and they don't want to believe it.
Okay, yeah.
So they don't want you to see them as weak, because everything they learned up till that point is never to let anyone see that.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
they don't want to see.
If a person's not willing to have a conversation about something, then right, it's not a good sign. But a similar point to what you're making, I don't know if this is what you meant, is actually the sages teach that a person will often see a blemish that they see in others is really something that they have in themselves. And
Yeah, something like that.
and so that's certainly true at times.
Yeah, can I say something real quick? Can I
Yeah.
add to that?
Sure.
Something happened to me very, very recently that really this whole thing rings true for. And the person criticized me for something that I thought they were saying that don't do such and such, or you're doing such and such to someone else. And I wasn't, but they don't like it when people do that to them. You know what I mean? So they were projecting, oh, you're doing,
Right.
sin A or whatever, and I wasn't, but they were very upset because that's something they don't like when people do to them.
Right.
And it really was hard to hold back. And
Right.
I was really like, I'm not doing A, that's not what I'm doing. And
Right.
it's very hard to hold back from defending yourself.
Right. 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 So we'll have to see, I guess, right, why, what's the, it is, and it takes might, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about. But again, what we're saying is in such a situation, we should, if somebody does criticize us, we should take a moment to appraise the situation and see if there's any truth to it, because why not grow from it if we can? And maybe we're doing something on, we don't realize it, or maybe we're doing it a little bit, and why not just give it an honest look, because our natural reaction is to get defensive. That's what we will do in that situation before we even consider whether what the person's saying is true. And I'm not justifying anybody criticizing, but I'm saying once somebody criticizes someone or insults someone, then we might as well take that and examine it and determine why did they say that, and is there any truth to it about me? Is there any, because we're talking about our own self-development. We're not talking about improving someone else. Can I improve myself as a result of what the person said? And maybe after, an honest appraisal, we'll say, no, it was totally unfounded. And like you're describing, maybe it's only because it's true for them or it happens to them and they're projecting it. That may be the answer. But what we're suggesting here is that we should give it, first before we react, stop. That's why we shouldn't react also, is to give it a chance to appraise it and to decide if there's any truth whatsoever to what they're saying. And again, if we could let it go, that itself is a great merit for us if we could overlook it.
So I have a question, if I could, with that. I mean, if you do think about it and assess and like, well, do I do that or did I do that? And you come to the conclusion that no, I really didn't do that. Is
Right.
it, then kosher, so to speak, after thinking about it, to then respond to the person and say, I hear where you're coming from, but I really didn't do that, or that wasn't my intention. Is
Right.
that acceptable?
I think each situation would have to be judged for whether that would be productive or not, or if you just, meaning, is there a reason to respond, or are we worried just that they think that about us? Like if they think that about us, responding may not change anything. It may, right? You have to decide really if there's anything productive, because often we'll say, I don't think it's true, but they do, and they're not going to change their mind because we say that we don't think it's true. So often the best approach is just to move on. Okay, if somebody thinks something about us, it's not necessarily going to hurt us. They could think that if they want, and we know for ourselves what's true and what's not. Yeah, Sue.
Yeah, another thing, on example of using the humor tactic, same individual sends a picture of something with the expectation that I would fight to defend what they find wrong with it, and I just made a big joke of it.
Right.
So that his whole purpose is defeated. That's not what I am out to support necessarily. So you're just being ridiculous.
Right. I think just from what I hear about your situation is, if somebody is continuously bothering me like that, I would just tell them to stop. Like, I'm not interested. And instead of trying to, don't have a conversation. It's like, just say, please stop sending me stuff. And if they don't, then
Oh,
that's, just block them or whatever,
oh,
like,
okay.
that's what I think I would do if it was, really something that I disliked.
Annoying
Okay.
and crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so two questions though that we still have to visit about this this piece of Talmud. One is, what does the sun have to do with it? It's like the sun coming out, and what is the sun coming out in its might with it? So the first point comes back to an interesting midrash. That some commentaries relate it to this. There may be other interpretations, but the midrash says, if you look at, it's actually also in the Talmud, number 5, it says that Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi raised a contradiction. When it talks about the creation of the sun and the moon in Genesis, in Bereshit, it says, and God made the 2 great lights. And then in the same verse, it says the great light to rule in the day and the lesser light to rule at night. So first it calls them both great, and then it says, the best translation really is not greater or lesser, the great and the small. That's really the Ma'or HaGadol and the Ma'or HaKatan. It said God created 2 Me'orot Gedolot, 2 great luminaries, and then it said the great one for the daytime and the small one for the nighttime. The Talmud says, I thought you said they're both great. What do you mean the great one and the small one? The great one for the daytime and the small one for the nighttime. So he explains that when God first created the sun and the moon, they were equally bright. Then the moon said before the Holy One, is it possible for 2 kings to serve with 1 crown? Can we really have 2 bright luminaries? So God said to the moon, if so, go and diminish yourself. Okay, now what this means on exactly what, did this happen? Did the moon and the sun talk? I don't think so. They don't talk. They don't have, but so it's either just teaching us a lesson, or it could refer to like some sort of angels that like represent those luminaries. Whatever it means, in terms of how such a thing happens. But the lesson that comes forth is that the moon challenged the sun, and the Talmud doesn't record any response from the sun. The sun didn't respond. The moon was like, we can't both be in charge here. So in other words, I should be the big one. Sun doesn't respond, and guess what? The sun ends up bigger, and the moon ends up smaller. So that's the sun in its might. The sun uses its might and doesn't respond to the attack of the moon, according to this midrash. That may be why we're referring to the sun, and it really takes might. Like Alyssa said before, it's hard not to just respond, and it takes gevura, it takes might, and that brings us back to our friend Ben Zoma in Pirkei Avot, which is number 6, where Ben Zoma says, first of all, who is wise? He who learns from every man, one who can learn from any person. And he says, who is mighty? One who subdues their evil inclination, or their inclination. So it takes might to subdue our inclination. It takes gevura. Gibor isn't just being strong, isn't just being able to lift weights or to win a boxing match. Being strong is overcoming our inclination. So we really want to respond. We have this certainly with like Lashon Hara. We really want to say something bad or crack a joke about someone. It takes enormous strength to hold ourselves back. So when we're being insulted, when we're being criticized, it takes enormous strength to hold back. Like Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz in the Tiferes Yisrael, in number 7, writes something fascinating. He says, when one's inclination tries to seduce one into taking revenge on one who hates them, so somebody insults us, so we want to take revenge. So if the person listens to their inclination and they take revenge, and let's say they take physical revenge, they have only conquered the external of their hater, their body, right? If they use their strength to respond and they smack the person, so they may have sort of conquered the person's body, the external, but they haven't conquered the person internally. But if one responds kindly to their hater, someone insults us and we respond with kindness, one conquers their internal. For now, that person, that hater, recognizes that they were antagonizing someone who was generous of spirit. The hater will be embarrassed and will submit themselves to the other in the future. So we can acquire a person in this way. If somebody hurts us or insults us, and again, we're not talking about something ongoing and abusive, but if it's a one-time thing out of anger or occasional, and we respond kindly to the person, we continue to treat them kindly, they're going to feel embarrassed. They're going to feel that they owe us, and we're going to acquire that person internally. We're going to acquire their inside as well. So if to quote Michelle Obama, when they go low, we go high, right? So if a person, you like that one, okay? So if a person goes high, if a person responds in a upstanding manner, then they actually can win that person over, and that person will no longer treat them in that way. But if we just hit them back, we insult them back, so then they're just gonna next time insult us again. Nothing's gonna change. It's going to just continue to and probably spiral out of control as a result. So it takes gevura, it takes strength, not to just lash out and respond, but in the end, we're better off. So this is where, again, going back to the verse where it said, the Talmud says that we rejoice in insult, or rejoice in criticism, because A, we can learn from it, we can improve as a result, and B, we can actually win the person over if we respond in a upstanding way to their lowness and their not as upstanding attack on us. I mentioned a story, I think, when we were learning the Haggadah a little bit on, so maybe familiar to some of you. The story was where Rabbi Aaron Cutler, who was really a founder of the yeshiva system in America, and he started the Lakewood Yeshiva, the largest yeshiva in America. So he was once raising money, and not for his own institution, for an institution in Israel, of schools, a school system in Israel. And he went with a certain Hasidic Rebbe to a wealthy person to ask for money for this institution. And the wealthy man was in his office, but the secretary said, "Oh, I'm sorry, he's not here right now." Now they knew he was really there. So they said, "Okay, we'll wait till he gets back." So they sat down in the waiting room, and now the man is trapped in his office. And they waited him out, and they waited and waited, and a couple hours later, he comes storming out of his office. He's so angry at them because he wanted to leave. He probably had to go to the bathroom, right? And he couldn't get out of his office. And he comes storming out, and he derides them. He says, people are always coming here and asking for money, and they don't have an appointment, and he berates them very, very harshly. And Rabbi Cutler sort of motioned to the Hasidic Rebbe. He said, I think we should probably go now. We're probably not getting our donation, right? So, but the Hasidic Rebbe said no. He said, he turned to the man, and he just motioned him to just wait. And they waited, and they were quiet. And eventually, once the man finished his rant, the Rebbe turned to the wealthy man and he said, "You've given us what we deserve. Now give this organization what it deserves." And the man gave a donation. And all this anger and fury built up, and they didn't respond. They didn't defend themselves. They didn't talk about how much they sacrificed for this, for the betterment of the Jewish people, and how they have to travel all around collecting money, and how difficult it is. And they didn't argue. They didn't explain. They didn't justify. They just waited him out. And by the time it was done, he snapped back to normal. And we mentioned at the time that in the Haggadah, we talk about the wicked son, the Rasha. And the Haggadah says that the wicked son, you blunt his teeth. And what that may mean is you blunt his anger, you wait him out, and then under that anger is a tzaddik, is a righteous person. He's angry, and now he's a rasha, now he's wicked. And we pointed out that that many quote this idea that the numerical value of the word rasha is 570, and it says blunt his teeth. And the numerical value of Shenav, which is teeth, is 366. And if you take 366, if you blunt the teeth of the rasha, if you take 366 away from 570, if you take the teeth away from the rasha, what are you left with? You're left with 204. And 204 is the numerical value of tzaddik, of a righteous person. That sometimes you just have to wait them out. And underneath that anger, underneath that fury, is really a good person, and they just lost their temper, and it doesn't help necessarily to respond. Sometimes the best medicine is to just wait them out, and they'll get over it, and the fury will die down. So accepting criticism is a difficult thing. It goes against our ego. We don't want to have to admit to any faults. And someone who has a big ego can't accept criticism because they can't admit faults. And to have a fault means they're not perfect. And so how did this happen? How did they do something wrong? Well, obviously, it was someone else's fault. It was their spouse's fault. It was their boss's fault. It was their friend's fault. It was someone else's fault. And that is the reaction that the ego tries to force on us when somebody criticizes us. Rabbi Dr. Twersky says that there's 4 essential things that every person, there's 4 necessities for human existence. Number 1, food and water. Number 2, shelter. Number 3, clothing. And number 4, someone to blame for our problems. Right? Everybody needs that person. And the truth is, though, that if we can't admit to fault, if we can't accept criticism, if we can't say I'm sorry, then our personal relationships are going to be very difficult. And also our relationship with God is also not going to be too great. It's a major impediment to spiritual growth if we can't admit that we ever do something wrong and that there's any room to improve. And that involves overcoming our ego and admitting that we could have fault. So it says in Koheles, in Ecclesiastes, in chapter 7, this is source number 8, it says, Al tehi tzaddik harbe. Here they say, don't overdo goodness. Don't be such a tzaddik. Don't be so righteous. Really what it says. Don't be such a tzaddik. And then the very next verse says, Al tirsha harbe. Don't overdo wickedness. Don't be such a rasha. Don't be so wicked. So the question is, which one's worse? To be too big of a tzaddik, to be too righteous, or to be too wicked? So Rabbi Yaakov Ruderman was the founder of the yeshiva I attended in Baltimore. He wasn't alive anymore when I was there, but he's the founder of Ner Israel. Rabbi Ruderman said, the overly righteous person is worse because you don't have any way of reasoning with such a person because they're doing the right thing. So how could, right? They're doing a mitzvah. If a person thinks that what they're doing is right, then there's really no way to reason that somebody, is just giving in to desires and is doing the wrong thing, but they don't believe, they don't justify, and they don't think it's right. So you could point it out to them, and they may say, you're right, I gotta improve on that. But if someone believes that they're doing a mitzvah, they're doing something righteous, they're doing something great because I can do no wrong, then it's really hard to reason with such a person. So the person who is overly righteous could be worse than the person who is overly wicked because they can't really improve. So how do you know what to do? So it really takes honesty. We have to honestly approach the Torah and see how the Torah guides us, and not to create our own alternate version of right and wrong and the morality. And it takes a true dedication to emes, to truth, which is a whole topic on its own, which we'll do eventually, is honesty and integrity and truth, seeking truth. Let's just close with a related topic, which is that the idea that we can learn from someone who insults us really speaks to Ben Zoma's first point in the Mishnah, in Pirkei Avos, in Ethics of the Fathers. Right, back to number 6, Ben Zoma says, who is wise? He who learns from every man. So we can learn from anyone. We can learn from someone who criticizes us. We can learn from someone who insults us. There could be a nugget of truth there that we can use to learn. But on a more basic level, it takes humility to be able to look around and realize that forget about the people who are criticizing us or insulting us, but we can also learn from every person. Every person we encounter, we can learn from them. Sometimes we learn what not to do, but often with good people, there's a positive trait that we can glean from every person that we encounter. And this may help us explain and understand the passage in the Talmud, which is number 9 here on the second page. Rabbi Chelbo said that Rav Huna said. Oh, no, we're not doing that one. We're going straight to number 10 for the sake of time. The sages talking at Tosefta. The sages talk. One who sees multitudes of Israel recites the following blessing. But if a person sees 600,000 Jews in one place, there's a special blessing that we say. It's Baruch Chacham Harazim. Blessed, Baruch Atah Hashem, right? Blessed is God who knows all secrets. Blessed is God who knows all secrets. And the Talmud goes on, it says, because he sees a whole nation whose minds are unlike each other and whose faces are unlike each other. And then it says, Ben Zoma, who was the author of our Mishnah that we're talking about, who is wise, right? Ben Zoma once saw a multitude, meaning he saw 600,000 people together on the Temple Mount. And he recited the blessing, blessed is Baruch Chacham Harazim, blessed is the one who knows all secrets. But then he added something. He added the words, and blessed is God who created all these people to serve me. Ha ha ha. Right? Sounds arrogant. All these people are here to serve me. But the truth is that if we take this blessing of Ben Zoma and we relate it to Ben Zoma's teaching in Pirkei Avos of who is wise, one who learns from all people, so then we can have a new understanding of what he meant. You see, the blessing of Baruch Chacham Harazim, blessed is God who knows all secrets. We see 600,000 people. So in certain societies, they call that the masses. They're not individuals, it's just a mass of people, right? But that's not how Judaism sees it. Judaism sees it as it says in the Talmud here, whose minds are unlike each other and faces are unlike each other. These are 600,000 individuals. God knows their secrets. God knows that each one is different, and God knows what's going on inside of each person. But each person is unique. Each person has their own skills. Each person has their own type of wisdom, their own perspective. And therefore, when Ben Zoma sees these people, he doesn't just bless God, but he also says, or he doesn't just say God knows all their secrets, but he also says, blessed is God who created all this to serve me. Because Ben Zoma lived by his own teaching that he can learn from all people. So everyone who he encounters, he says, you are here to serve me. Not that he's going to ask them to bring him a drink or something, right? He sees that he has something that he can gain from every person that he encounters because he can learn from every person. And each of us, we look around, our friends, our acquaintances, if we consider what's their strength, what do they have going for them? What can I learn from that person? We'll find something from every person because everybody has a unique strength, a unique something special about them. But we have to sometimes give it some thought and see the positive in other people, and then we can learn from that. So to close, Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe offers one more strategy to develop humility. And that is to use this idea that it takes humility to learn from every person. And sometimes if we do acts of humility, then it trains us to be humble. And so he says, Rabbi Wolbe says that his teacher, Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz, would always say, one strategy to develop humility is to ask for advice from a child and then listen to it. And Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz actually did this, probably on more than one occasion, but Rabbi Wolbe recounts one occasion where a father sent his child to Rabbi Levovitz for some reason, and before the child left, Rabbi Levovitz said, I feel a little cold. What do you recommend? Should I go back to the yeshiva to pray the afternoon service, to pray mincha, or should I stay home? And the boy said, I think you should stay home. And guess what he did? He stayed home. And when we train ourselves that we can learn from anyone, we can learn from a child, we can accept the opinion of a child, the perspective of a child, then certainly we can learn to accept and listen to our peers, and that takes humility. And this can help us develop humility within ourselves. Okay, so let me just do actually a quick summary. Before I let you go, we talked about not responding to insults if we can, to hold back. It takes gevura, it takes strength not to respond, but ultimately we're probably better off that way if we avoid an argument, but there's something we can learn from what they said. There's probably a wrinkle of truth within what they said, and we can use that to grow. Also, we can acquire that person by not responding, because truth is they'll be a little embarrassed for treating us that way if we treat them so well. And hopefully next time they won't act that way towards us. Certainly we should listen to criticism, not react, with get defensive and counterattack, justification. Rather give it a proper appraisal, and then you can have a conversation about it. And again, usually there's something true within the criticism that we're getting if we allow our egos to at least consider it. And it's a really good thing to be able to accept criticism. It helps us grow. If we can't, feedback is a big thing in the workplace, right? Feedback, and that's what criticism is. It's feedback, and it has to be done in the proper way. But it helps us improve. And lastly, we talked about learning from everyone. It takes humility to be able to see the greatness, to see what other people have to offer, but they do have something to offer, and we can learn from every person that we encounter. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes.
was great.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
That was
Go off,
wonderful.
Rabbi.
Everyone have a good night.
That was